My wife and I have been together for more than 12 years and have come a long way. There have been many ups and downs, but we have faced them all together. We had a wonderful son to whom we paid due attention, instilling the right values and beliefs in him. But my happy family life collapsed in just 3 days. I made a mistake by letting a man into my life who turned out to be truly evil. I wish for this very much, but I promise that he will regret his actions. I want to tell you my tragic story. Enjoy watching it. My name is Jonathan. I'm 35 years old, and what I've been through is something I wouldn't wish on even my worst enemy. I am the owner of 3 cafes, a business that I have been building for 10 years, starting right after graduation when I was 25 years old. I started working at the age of 17, first as a part-time waiter, and eventually became a chef in one of the good restaurants in our state. By the time I was 25, I had worked in more than 10 establishments and had a complete understanding of how the business worked. I always dreamed of opening my own restaurant. I was confident that I could make it happen. I loved cooking, and bringing joy to people through my food brought me immense happiness. However, I lacked the means because I was a recent graduate. At that time, I was dating my future wife, Alice, who was 23 then. She's 33 now, 2 years younger than me. I always understood that if I wanted to provide a good life for my family, I needed to pursue what I loved. Because what's the point of earning well doing something you dislike if it doesn't make you happy? I got along well with Alice's parents, and her father supported me. The initial funds for starting my business came from him. It took me 3 years to build up so that the business started to bring me the first money. During this time, Alice and I got married, and she gave birth to our son, Martin, who is now 7 years old. It was a financially unstable period. All the money went into the business, and Alice and I lived in her parents' house with our child, in a room that was 18 square meters, with an old sofa bed, a wardrobe, and a table. We lived in such conditions for 4 years. Afterward, I paid off all my debts, returned the money to Alice's father with a good interest rate, and we bought a small 2-story house on the outskirts of the city. We renovated it according to our dreams, bought a car, got a Welsh corgi named Buddy, and did everything to make ourselves happy. Alice supported me throughout my journey and didn't regret it. By the time she was 28, she had everything she wanted. All her struggles paid off. We could afford to travel to different countries together: Bali, Greece, Italy, and more. We dined in fashionable restaurants, bought clothes from expensive stores, rented yachts, and didn't deny ourselves anything. 5 years after opening the first cafe, I opened a second, and a year and a half later, a third. Thus, my modest cave turned into a chain, increasing not only my profits, but also my responsibilities. Since Alice didn't work elsewhere, she managed the financial side. She was my personal accountant, handling our family budget. She also took care of raising our son, while I could spend entire days at work. Apart from household duties, Alice indulged in various activities, mainly visiting beauty salons, getting massages, and actively engaging in tennis. Overall, I was happy for my wife. That was a brief overview of my life from 17 to 35. Now let me briefly tell you about my childhood. I didn't come from a wealthy family. You could say we were poor because my father was always drinking, and my mother combined work with taking care of the children. I grew up not alone, but with my brother Jack, who was 5 years older than me. We didn't get along well, and he always envied me. With my arrival, my parents began to devote more attention to me and less to my brother. Well, I think you understand how it happens. Jack always thought I was a braggart because I did well in school, while he was on the verge of being expelled. My parents praised me, but not him. I didn't notice all this when I was a kid, but now, looking back at the situation I'm about to share, it gives me goosebumps. However, let's not focus on this right now. Jack never defended me. He wasn't interested in how I was doing. On the contrary, he tried to make trouble for me. I moved out of our parents' home before him because I started working while Jack kept hanging out with his friends, drinking just like our father. I constantly worked, studied, developed, and aimed to become better because I didn't want my children to live in the conditions I experienced in my childhood. No, I don't mean to say that I didn't love my parents. They never mistreated me. They just lost themselves at some point. At least my father did. Nobody hit me. My mother was always ready to give her sons everything, including. Thanks to my parents, I probably learned to love, so I am forever grateful to them. When I was 22, my mother died in an accident, and my father descended into deeper alcoholism. He also passed away 2 years later. Jack continued living in their house, and when they both passed away, I didn't claim it. Since the day I left home, I saw Jack only a couple of times. Mostly, he messaged me asking for money. While I was developing my business, building my family, Jack didn't move forward. He continued living in our parents' house, working as a club bouncer or a waiter, trying, unsuccessfully, to open his own store. Out of principle, I didn't offer him a job at my establishments because I believed he should find his own true path. I think it's the right thing to do. Jack always knew what I was up to and how my life was going because I actively maintained my social media. I wanted to show people through my own example that one can be happy and get out of any difficult situation. And apparently, Jack was quite annoyed by this. When I was a teenager and told him that I wanted to open my own business, he just laughed. He didn't directly say that he didn't believe in me, but it was strongly felt in his words and reactions. Now let's fast forward to the present. I'm 35 years old, married to Alice, who is 33. We are jointly raising our 7-year-old son, Martin. I have a network of 3 establishments, a house, a car, and overall, a good life. It seemed like everything was going well. In November 2023, my wife, son, and I returned from another vacation. We travel abroad at least 3 times a year, sometimes leaving our son with Alice's parents. In November, I had a lot of work because I planned to open a 4th establishment in a different state early next year. While vacationing in Australia with Alice, I met an interesting person who had his own candle production, selling them worldwide mainly through online stores. He wanted to try his hand in the food industry and proposed a mutually beneficial partnership. I agreed, so the entire November and December were busy with work for me. In the same month, November, my brother Jack wrote to me. He had gotten into a difficult situation, and due to significant debts, our parents' house had been taken away from him. I was honestly shocked when I first heard this news. After our parents' death, I had refused the inheritance, entrusting it entirely to my brother, as I understood that he probably couldn't afford housing, and at least this house would remain with him, and he could keep it. But alas, it turned out differently. Jack started calling me, asking if he could stay with me for a couple of weeks in my house until he found a job and could buy back the house. I offered him the following deal. I would help him buy back the house if he stopped drinking, promised to find a job that he could keep for a long time, and then I would gradually pay off all his debts. I considered it a good deal, giving him a chance to start fresh at the age of 40. However, I also suggested he rent temporary accommodation, but he immediately refused, arguing that he wanted to take the right path and wanted me to see it personally. I wasn't thrilled about the idea of letting Jack into my home, so I tried various ways to steer clear of it and convince him that I could easily provide him with housing for a few months. But he resisted. I decided to talk to my wife Alice to make a final decision. I genuinely loved my brother. He was someone close to me, and despite being a complete jerk to me, I still loved him. I even felt ashamed at some point because I had succeeded and he hadn't. So I was always ready to help him, but in a way that made it clear it wouldn't be forever. After consulting with Alice, we came to a unanimous decision. We would let Jack into our home on the condition that within a week he finds a job and is ready to stay there for a long time. I was even ready to help him in the job search, either by leveraging my connections or hiring him in my establishment. Quits drinking, and after a week, depending on how much he improved, I would buy back the house and he would return to it. After that, I would never help him again. It seemed like a great idea to me. I would give my brother one last chance to get on the right track at the age of 40. It's never too late. I also advised him to find a person who will motivate him. I proved to myself that by finding a suitable life partner, you can move mountains. So I called Jack and explained all the conditions. Surprisingly, he agreed, and that same evening he arrived at our home. It was 8 o'clock in the evening. Martin was in his room on the second floor doing homework, and Alice was in the kitchen cooking and preparing to welcome our guest. We decided to accommodate him in the living room downstairs on the couch, since there were only 2 bedrooms on the second floor, one for us and one for our son. The doorbell rang, and I went to answer it. I saw Jack with a suitcase, probably our parents, and couldn't say for sure, but he was probably 20 or even older. Jack himself didn't look great, but there was no smell of alcohol, which pleased me. If I even sensed the smell of alcohol in our house, he would be kicked out immediately. We hugged like brothers, and he entered the house. Alice had already set the table, and I invited Jack to wash his hands and join us at the table to eat together. We sat for about an hour, chatting about everything in the world. My wife Alice did most of the talking. I think that night she told us everything about our lives and more. Jack responded well to everything. He laughed and joked a lot too. I didn't harbor any hatred towards him for what happened before. I believe people can change, and those changes were evident in him. He even shaved and smelled good. I'm not sure where he did it, considering he no longer had a home, but he was doing well. The evening ended on a positive note. We chatted a lot, and Jack seemed to have adapted to the environment. We showed him where he would sleep, explained the rules. We all wake up at 6 a.m. Martin goes to school. Alice takes care of household chores, and then she goes for her morning routines while I head to work. So Jack, accompanied by our dog Buddy, could peacefully spend the morning and start looking for a job. After that, we all went to sleep. As we lay in bed, I decided to ask Alice about her opinion on my brother. She said he seemed a bit strange, and if she were in my place, she would install a couple of hidden cameras in the house. I wanted to know why she thought that way. She said that she just felt the need for it, without giving a clear answer. My wife is a good judge of people due to her long-standing participation in spiritual practices. She mentioned that she had intentionally told him about our happy life, and she did not like his reaction. She felt something fake. However, I didn't feel any of this. It seemed to me that everything was fine. While I used to always listen to her, now I felt she might be exaggerating and cameras in our house weren't necessary. She asked if I was sure, and I replied that I would think about it tomorrow. Before falling asleep, thoughts swirled in my head. In reality, there was a person in my house whom I hadn't seen in a couple of years. I didn't know how he lived, what he had been doing, and yet I calmly let him into my home. Crime movies came to mind, where the victim unknowingly lets the maniac into their home. These thoughts scared me, and I had a hard time sleeping. The next morning, I woke up exhausted because I hadn't slept well. My wife prepared breakfast and Martin was getting ready for school. Jack continued sleeping or simply ignored our noise. However, we didn't wake him up. I decided to skip breakfast and headed straight to work, or more precisely, to my office. I retrieved 3 cameras that I had left there. They were spare ones. These were good quality cameras that could be discreetly installed anywhere, as long as they were well disguised. Moreover, I could easily connect them and monitor my house on my phone while I was away. This is how I keep track of my business too. I got home at 8:30 a.m. By that time, Martin had gone to school and Alice was doing household chores. When I returned home, I hoped that Jack was still asleep, but when I arrived, he was already sitting at the table, drinking coffee and eating fried eggs. Alice understood why I came back, but Jack didn't, so I said that I had left important documents at home, which was actually true. I went up to the second floor, quickly grabbed the documents, and took out the surveillance cameras from my work bag, hiding them in the bedside table. Back downstairs, I wished everyone a good day, kissed my wife, and told Jack to start looking for a job. He said he already was, and I rushed out of the house because I had a meeting scheduled for 9 a.m. The entire day flew by. I was engrossed in work, dealing with important matters. I needed to maintain this pace at least until mid-December. Alice managed to attend her procedures during the day, visit her parents, and pick up Martin from school. By 3 p.m., everyone was back home, and I returned around 10 a.m., tired and hungry. Jack had spent the whole day at home. and Alice said everything was fine. We sat at the table, and I asked Jack about his day. He replied that he already had 2 job interviews scheduled for the next day, one as a salesperson in a store and another as a security guard at a company. I was happy for him. We sat for a while, then grabbed a bottle of water from the cooler so that we wouldn't have to go downstairs again, and went upstairs, wishing each other good night. At 10:45 p.m., Alice and I were already in bed. I asked her about her day and Jack's behavior. She mentioned she didn't hear him talking to anyone on the phone regarding a job, and when she returned home he was just sitting and watching TV all evening. I wasn't particularly pleased with that, and I suggested I would wake up at 3 a.m. and try to discreetly install cameras in the living room and kitchen. I would place the 3rd camera in the corridor on the 2nd floor. I set the alarm, we drank water, and went to sleep. I woke up to my wife's screams at 9:20 a.m. saying, "Jonathan, we overslept." Oh my God. I quickly got up and started rushing to get ready for work. I had a meeting scheduled for 9 a.m., and before that, I needed to visit each of my establishments. Besides oversleeping, I had a severe headache, and I couldn't think straight. It was the first time we all overslept, missing all our alarms. Martin also overslept because no one woke him up, so we hastily began getting ready. As a result, the meeting was ruined as I was 50 minutes late. It threw me off balance. I had never allowed myself to be late and criticized people when they were late for business meetings. Due to this, my entire day went off course, and so did Alice's. I returned home earlier at 8:00 p.m. I was very tired, so I just had some water and went to bed. Today's meeting was rescheduled for tomorrow at 8:00 a.m., and there was another one at 10:00 a.m., so I dozed off without much thought, and the only thing Alice told me was that Jack had spent the entire day at home, but I didn't care. The next morning, we all woke up at 10:30 a.m. I had slept for about 13 hours, but woke up feeling as if I hadn't slept at all. All meetings were canceled. I had more than 60 missed calls on my phone. Martin didn't go to school, and he was very happy about that. Alice and I woke up again in a terrible condition. I resigned myself to the situation that my job was going down the drain. I calmly went downstairs and saw Jack sleeping. I began to wake him up, and he quickly woke up, asking why I wasn't at work since it was already late. I countered with a question, saying that I would leave a bit later today, but didn't specify the exact time. He mentioned that his meeting from yesterday got rescheduled for today, so I decided to confirm the time. He said it was at 1 in the afternoon. I replied that I would still be home and could give him a ride. However, he insisted on taking a taxi, arguing that there was no need for me to waste my time. Silently agreeing while Alice was getting ready upstairs, I suggested Jack go to the kitchen for coffee, and he agreed. I poured a glass of water from the cooler, drank some, and offered it to Jack, but he declined, saying he didn't want any. A few minutes later, he went to the bathroom and did something there. I noticed that our dog, Buddy, was still sleeping and decided to nudge him with my foot. He was alive, just fast asleep, which seemed suspicious to me since he was always hyperactive in the morning. And now he was asleep, besides we were pouring water for him from the cooler. At that moment, holding a half-empty glass of water in my hands, I rushed into the bathroom and saw Jack leaning over the sink. I asked him what he was doing, and he said he was just rinsing his mouth and brushing his teeth. However, there was no toothbrush or toothpaste in the bathroom. He left the bathroom, and I tried to vomit the water, but I couldn't. I left the bathroom and saw Alice coming down. I immediately warned her not to drink water from the cooler, and we went to the kitchen. Alice started making scrambled eggs, and I, having filled a full glass of water, placed it in front of Jack, saying that if he wanted water he could have it, no problem. He thanked me, but didn't drink. We sat in silence for about 3 minutes, and then Jack initiated a conversation, commenting that we seemed off, asking if everything was okay. I reassured him that everything was fine, and Alice confirmed it. In reality, both of us had terrible headaches, and we felt awful. We didn't speak to Jack anymore. After breakfast, I headed upstairs, and Jack stayed downstairs to watch TV. It was the second or third day since he moved into our house and everything was getting worse. I went downstairs at noon to make sure Jack didn't need a ride. Again, he declined, saying he had already called a taxi. By that time, I had asked my friend Russell to drive by my house and keep an eye on Jack, following him wherever he went. At 12:15, Jack left the house and got into a car. Russell followed him, while I stayed home with my wife and son, canceling all my appointments for the week. While Martin played video games in the living room, Alice and I decided to install cameras, one in the second-floor hallway, one in the kitchen. Meanwhile, Buddy woke up displaying the same lethargic state as us. In the kitchen, I replaced the water in the cooler and decided to send a sample to the lab. I realized that something was terribly wrong, and although I had suspicions, I didn't want to believe them. Why did we start sleeping so much? And why did we feel sick after Jack came into our house? Why wasn't he drinking water from the cooler? Dark thoughts crossed my mind, but I didn't want to accept them. After setting up the kitchen camera, I suggested Alice check if everything was in its place around the house. Instead of inspecting Jack's suitcases, I went to my bedroom to verify the safe with important documents and money. Everything was intact. Alice confirmed that nothing had disappeared, alleviating my negative thoughts. The third camera went into the living room. Martin became curious about our activities, and we told him we were installing cameras to monitor Uncle Jack because he was acting strangely. Martin looked at us, seemingly hiding something, but when questioned, he insisted he knew nothing. During the interrogation, Russell called to inform me that Jack didn't go for an interview. Instead, he met with a man, strolled around for an hour and a half, then called a taxi and returned home. I understood that something horrifying was happening. Martin didn't want to talk. Jack lied about his interview. And both Alice and I felt terrible for the second consecutive day. I planned to leave the house once Jack returned to take the water sample to the lab. However, I realized leaving Martin alone at home would risk him informing Jack about our surveillance. Thus, Alice and I decided to send Martin to her parents' house for a couple of days until we figured out this puzzling situation. Alice quickly gathered Martin, and we started leaving. By then, a taxi had arrived, and Jack got out of it looking content. Alice promptly put Martin in the car, and I approached Jack, pretending everything was fine. I told him that Martin wanted to spend time with his grandparents, and Jack thought it was cool, heading inside. Meanwhile, we swiftly took our son to his grandparents and headed to the lab. I needed to stop by 3 of my establishments, so Alice stayed behind to monitor the cameras. We returned home at 6 p.m., and according to the camera feed, Jack had been lying on the couch watching TV the whole time. As we entered the house, I felt that it was no longer safe. I didn't know why, but at some point something started deeply disturbing me. I asked Jack how the interview went, trying not to arouse suspicion. He said, "Does it not seem to me that I am happy? I start my internship tomorrow at 2J at the gas station." I congratulated him, sincerely rejoicing for him, losing sight of the fact that he had to get a job at a grocery store or as a security guard at a factory. I had no idea where the gas station came from. The evening passed as usual. We had dinner and prepared to sleep. Before that, I went to the garage and called my lawyer, offering him access to the cameras in my house. I was scared to be in it. It was unlikely I would sleep tonight, although my condition suggested otherwise. The lawyer's name was Craig. I explained my situation, and he agreed to help. He would monitor the cameras all night, and in case of any threat, summon the police. That was the plan. It would make me feel more at ease, knowing that if I fell asleep, there would be an additional layer of protection in the form of Craig. I returned to the house. Alice was already upstairs. She was not feeling well either. I went upstairs in silence when suddenly Jack wished me a good night and asked if I needed water. I thought, that son of a bitch. I went down and got a bottle of water on purpose. I didn't take any chances, and I didn't drink this water. I went upstairs, and my anxiety increased. There were 1,000 options in my head that Jack could do while Alice and I were out. And the scariest thing was that our son knew something but didn't say anything. Before I went to bed, I texted Craig to see if he had managed to connect to our cameras, and he replied that everything was fine and he was watching. Alice was also worried. I replied that everything would be fine, and we went to bed. She fell asleep quickly, and I followed her. I woke up at night. I don't remember exactly what, but I woke up and felt tension without opening my eyes. I felt a slight chill sweep through the room, and I quickly concluded that the door to our bedroom was already open. From this thought I froze. My body began to tremble. There was absolute silence, but I felt someone's presence in our bedroom. But the scariest thing is that we locked the door. I decided to open my eyes a little and look around. The door to our bedroom was on my left. Alice was also lying to my left. Opening my eyes, I saw the entire right side of the bedroom. Turning to look to the left, I saw a dark silhouette standing in our doorway watching us. I didn't understand anything. I could only see the upper part of her body, and she was naked. Jack was standing and looking at us. I didn't understand anything. How much time is now? Whether Craig sees it? And what should I do now? Jack began to approach quietly. Every step was quietly audible, and I felt Alice poke me with her finger. I realized that she was not sleeping. She was lying on her side, with her back to the door. I felt how scared she was, remembering that there was a marble statuette on the bedside table to my right. I quickly grabbed it and threw it right at Jack, and hit him right in the head. He got confused and screamed. I quickly got out of bed, grabbed a blanket, and knocked Jack to the floor. I covered him completely with a blanket and began to hold him in this position. Alice got out of bed and turned on the light, picked up the phone, and called the police. They said on the phone that a police squad was already on its way to us, and it would arrive any minute. I loosened my grip, and Jack released his hand, which he used to hit me hard in the face with the statuette. I fell to the floor and lost consciousness. What happened next will be according to my wife. When my wife saw that I had lost consciousness, she ran to the bathroom on the second floor and locked herself in there. Jack began to break down the door, saying that he did not fully enjoy her and wanted to take her body and consciousness. He broke down the door and shouted that he did dirty things to her every night. My wife locked herself in the corner of the bathtub and sobbed. At that moment, she heard voices and a strong muffled thump. It was Jack who knocked out one of the policemen who wanted to grab him. Jack was in good physical shape, and he had been boxing for a long time, so he had practiced punches, but he could not resist the taser and was eventually captured. I woke up in the hospital this morning. I had a concussion. My trusted lawyer, Craig, was next to me. He said that he saw my brother stripped naked and started walking up the stairs, and he immediately called the police. It was around 12 o'clock at night. Craig called me, but my phone was on silent, so he couldn't get through to me. He has already drawn up a statement based on all my earlier testimony, and he also learned from the laboratory that the results are ready. As it turned out, Jack poured into our water cooler a mixture of medicines that were highly effective. For obvious reasons, I can't tell their name. Craig also said that if I press all my charges, my brother could face up to 10 years in prison. Craig kept saying something, but I wasn't interested. I was worried about one question. Where is my wife, Alice? Craig replied that she spent the whole night at the police station to give all the evidence. Now she is seeing a psychologist. She has a severe psychological trauma, and I can't see her yet. I didn't understand what was going on. At that moment, I couldn't grasp the full scale of the situation. Craig continued to say something. I told him to shut up and to take me to Alice immediately. He tried to convince me once again that it was better not to do this, but I had to yell. As a result, we moved out. On the way, I asked him what happened to her. Did this asshole offend her somehow? But Craig didn't say anything and said it was better to let her tell me about it personally. We arrived at another hospital. We quickly found Alice. She looked shabby, she hadn't slept all night, and seemed on the verge of a nervous breakdown. When she saw me, she immediately ran away, and I didn't understand what was going on. I wanted to ask the doctor, but they started saying they wouldn't say anything without Alice's consent. I started yelling and freaking out, saying that this is my wife, and I need to know the truth. As a result, after 10 minutes of arguments, the chief physician invited me to his office, where he paused for a minute before saying something. The doctor said, "Mr. Jonathan, your wife Alice was sexually assaulted by your brother for 2 days. When Jack was questioned at the police station, he told in detail what and how he did with your wife. It all happened on the record. Your brother has 10 hours of footage on his phone of him bullying your wife. I am very sorry to tell you this, but it is true." Alice doesn't know about all this. She only knows what Jack told her while trying to get into her bathroom. We also conducted an examination, and there is a high probability that Alice is pregnant, but it's hard to say yet. We need to re-examine in a week. When I heard that, my world collapsed. I didn't know how to digest all that I heard, and the scariest thing is that it's all my fault. I let this goat into our house. I let him sleep on our couch. It's all me, and I think I'll never get rid of this feeling. I asked the doctor if something suddenly turns out to call me right away, so that he would not tell my wife anything. The doctor also added that Alice is in an unstable emotional state, and she needs to stay in the hospital for at least a couple of days, and only then she can be released. My wife is crazy. What have I done? I came out of the hospital depressed. The lawyer said that we need to move to the police station. Alice's parents and my son Martin are there now. Martin told me something important, and I need to hear it. I opened my phone and saw dozens of missed calls from Alice's parents. Upon arriving at the police station, Craig and I were greeted by our parents, who were scared. I went to the police station and was taken to an interrogation room. The investigator in my case, who had already sent Craig, was sitting in front of me. He wanted to clarify all the details and tell me about further actions. He started saying, "The first thing I want to say is that your brother is a complete freak. Secondly, Alice and Martin's parents came to our station this morning. They were scared. They spent the whole night trying to get information from Martin, and Martin told them in secret about what happened one night. Martin woke up in the middle of the night and wanted to go to the toilet. After leaving the room, he noticed that the door to your room was open and the light was on. Presumably, it was midnight. He looked in the door and saw Kronstein standing with a camera and Jack on your bed. Well, with your wife. I'm really sorry to hear that. And anyway, Jack noticed Martin and immediately went up to him and started saying that they were making a movie and it would soon appear on all screens of the country. And Jack strongly asked your son not to tell anyone about it, even you, because supposedly it was supposed to be a surprise for Martin. So he did nothing. I didn't tell you. I listened to the investigator and anger boiled inside me. The investigator said that I didn't have much options. I needed to put Jack in jail. He also added that Jack sent out material about how he mocks my wife to at least 3 people. They were all invited to the station and their phones were cleaned. I am grateful to them for such prompt work. I spent 5 hours at the station. I talked with Alice's parents, the investigator, and my lawyer. I decided that the trial would take place without my wife's participation. She doesn't know all the details, and I didn't want her to ever know them, because that would definitely drive her crazy. The trial was scheduled to take place the next day. I took my son home and put the house up for sale the same day. The trial was held. In total, Jack will receive 20 years of strict regime. He got more than he needed, and I have people who influenced it. During the trial, I did not look at him. I did not perceive him in any way. I had an emptiness inside. I wanted to see my wife as soon as possible. 3 days after the trial, the doctor called me and told me first the good news that Alice was on the mend and wanted to see me, and the bad news that she was pregnant. I didn't know if it was my child or not, but the doctor convinced me that if she and I hadn't had intimacy in the past week, then it definitely wasn't mine. I asked the doctor to do what needed to be done, and he understood me. The next day, Alice was discharged from the hospital. She did not understand what had happened to me in the past 5 days, and I hope that she will never know all the details. Alice was convinced at the hospital that Jack had lied and nothing had happened between them, and this calmed her down. All she knows is that he wanted to attack us at night and steal all our savings, and now he's in jail for exactly that. It's been a month since those terrible events ended. Alice and I bought a new house in another city, and I'm going to open another restaurant in it. In general, life is getting better. It is difficult for me to remember those events and how my life changed before and after, but now I have begun to devote more time to my family. I do not know how life will turn out next, but I hope that everything will be fine. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.